Yo, Sonic! Sonic! Man, stay off the light speed!
My bad.
On the next Sonic X, the search for the Master Emerald leads Sonic to an ancient ruin. Kinda creepy.
Sonic Adventure marked the big jump into 3D for Sonic, and the rest was history. Everyone liked it, and not a single person has ever made fun of this game. It's obviously very easy to see how this game affected Sonic's legacy moving forward, regardless of what you think of the game as a whole. It accomplished something that no one had seen at the time and is remembered really fondly. And with the Sonic franchise's knack of making sure that you never forget every Sonic story, maybe excluding a few, Sonic Adventure is still relevant to this day because of all the references and callbacks. The thing is, though, is that there have been some mediums that have not just mentioned the story, but have outright adapted it. Sonic Adventure's story has had 3 variations: the original on the Dreamcast, the beginning of Sonic X's Season 2, and Archie's 7-issue story in Sonic the Hedgehog. 3 different versions, but are all 3 of them completely different from one another? Let's find out. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is ShrugPod, and today let's dive into one of Sonic's most iconic stories and investigate every version of Sonic Adventure. In this video, I don't necessarily want to say the same story 3 times. That would only be a little repetitive. Not only do I want to deep dive into each of these stories, but overall I really want to see what each of these stories does the best. There's going to be some overlap, just kind of some general things that happen overall, but I'm not going to go into every single detail 3 different times. Now, obviously, the original game is going to have a better leg to stand on because it's the one that's been remembered the longest, it's had the legacy and the impact, but I want to see what the other 2 can bring to the table and potentially do that's better than the original game. So let's get started by looking over the entire point of this video with the game itself. I'll be going over the major highlights of each campaign and what story beats majorly affected the plot. Who better to start with than Sonic himself? Sonic's story is the definite main campaign of the game. Everything branches from Sonic and his conflict with Eggman. At the very beginning, Sonic is introduced to a being named Chaos, this sentient water creature who is incredibly strong. After Sonic beats it, it's revealed to the player that Eggman is behind it. Sonic ends up finding Tails, and the 2 of them discover that Eggman is controlling this new creature with the Chaos Emeralds, increasing the creature in size when acquiring one of the gemstones. We're soon introduced to Knuckles, who is seemingly on his own journey as well, who is also familiar with this creature. The stakes become higher and higher as Dr. Eggman reveals his egg carrier, which Sonic and Tails quickly pursue to try and stop it. All of the major players make it atop the massive ship, seeing Amy Rose defending a new Eggman robot named Gamma, as well as Big the Cat following the trail left behind by his pet Froggy. Sonic, Knuckles, and Big stop Chaos in his biggest form, giving hope that it has finally been stopped. This leads Sonic being led by the Glow, getting a history lesson, and then beating Eggman and
Get a load of this!
If you run through the main story with Sonic all the way first, this unlocks 5 more campaigns and 5 full story modes that all overlap. The most important part of the story is this thing: the Glow. We're introduced to Tykel, who is the character used to convey the history of the Echidna clan and the impending doom that Chaos will bring destruction if allowed to achieve its full form. We get to learn more about this with Tails' story. At the beginning, Tails is flying his new plane, which crashes on the Emerald Coast, and then Sonic ends up finding Tails after the crash. Cue similar story beats as Sonic, with fighting Eggman and Chaos until they both split up after crashing during their flight to the egg carrier. This is when Tails' story comes into full force and he starts focusing on his independence from Sonic. Tails finds an emerald, follows the Glow, and experiences Tykel's vision. Following that, we diverge back into Sonic's plot, which takes him to the egg carrier, but instead Tails takes Amy while Sonic, Knuckles, and Big fight Chaos. The biggest divergence is that after Tails gets Amy to safety, Tails tries to avoid Eggman committing a war crime and stops him in front of Casinopolis. Tails wraps up his story, which leads us into an arguably very important character to the overall plot, which is Knuckles. You wouldn't think that from his gameplay, though. Knuckles is on Angel Island, but after the Master Emerald breaks and he's defeated by Chaos, he sees the floating island fall into the ocean. Cue Knuckles' quest of finding the Master Emerald shard, seeing visions of his old tribe from the Glow, and fighting Chaos, being once again tricked that Sonic is the issue and being once again a big idiot. Instead of chasing the egg carrier, Knuckles instead tries to find more shards, is visited by the Glow for another vision, and then the contractually obligated visit to the egg carrier to fight Chaos. This gives Knuckles one more vision, getting a more complete story of what happened to his people with this fight. Knuckles completes the Master Emerald, saving the island and beating his story. Since a lot of his people are the primary focus, it makes sense that Knuckles visits the past more than any of the other characters. It is really fun to see Knuckles and explore a part of his character that makes him really unique. I can't say that a couple of these remaining characters are the same way. Amy's plot sees her befriending this blue bird named Birdie along with being chased by a robot named Zero. After being caught, Amy arrives on the egg carrier, fulfilling her contract pretty early on and ends up befriending Gamma. During her exploration, she gets her visit with the Glow, adding one more piece of the puzzle. Eggman takes the Chaos Emerald from Birdie, cueing the Gamma vs. Sonic and Tails fight, and Amy is taken back by Tails. She returns to Station Square, determined to reunite Birdie and his brethren, so she goes back to the egg carrier, defeats Zero, then wraps up her story. The other plot that doesn't have as much bearing, but definitely more than Amy, is Big, who sees his buddy Froggy possessed by this puddle of water, and so begins the quest to get him back. There's a lot of fishing. Gamma captures Froggy, which leads Big to the egg carrier where he encounters the Glow. Big joins the fight against Chaos when Froggy jumps into the large water creature, saving Froggy in the process. Knuckles and Sonic have to do the real fighting, while my man Big is playing Big Bass Catcher. Big makes it off the egg carrier and heads home. What a hoss. The final story is arguably the best story in the whole game, but it doesn't have as much bearing on the overall plot. Gamma's story sees him and his brothers set to hunt down Froggy, and after he succeeds and is visited by the Glow, his brothers are all killed. Oh. Gamma then is sent to get Amy's bird friend, but after seeing his dead brother's body be mutilated, decides to let Amy go free. Oh. Gamma's newest target is Sonic and Tails, but we kinda know how this goes. This leads into the crazy plot of, after the egg carrier crashes, Gamma goes to destroy his brothers and free the animals inside. Gamma succeeds, but takes massive damage in the process, ultimately losing his robotic body. This allows the bird that fuels him to be free, revealing that Gamma's bird was once one of Birdie's siblings, ending the final character story and letting Birdie go home to his family. Now, despite these characters combining all in the end, some of them have more to give to the overall plot than others. However, the coolest aspect was taking each story and getting little flashbacks from, and seeing the tragedy unfold of the Echidna clan. Knowing all that we do, we take what Tikal has told us, process this information, and that takes us into the final story. After Angel Island falls back into the ocean, the plot thickens as Eggman is taken out by Chaos, who survived the egg carrier crash. Knuckles is noticing the issues with the Master Emerald and is caught off guard as Chaos gets him.
Yeah, but they got him.
What does that mean?
I liked him too.
Wait, what do you mean they got him?
Sonic and Tails find the two unconscious victims, Eggman leaves to get revenge, while Knuckles warns Sonic that Chaos needs one more emerald and Doomsday is a-coming. The Glow returns and Sonic sees the full story of what happened with Tikal, Chaos, and the Echidna clan. Chaos does end up acquiring the last emerald, turning into perfect Chaos. Tikal then appears to our cast and they all deduce that they need to defeat Chaos instead of sealing him again. Super Sonic beats perfect Chaos, then Tikal and Chaos go to Chow Heaven. The end. Like I've said a couple of times already, this story is so iconic to the series, some of you may be knowing it just like the back of your sweaty little hands. It's important to note that at the time, all 6 campaigns coming together to all bring something to the table and then having one final story was just not seen, and cemented why Sonic Adventure was so popular and so well loved. It's not perfect, but boy was it impressive, and boy was it fun. So to break down the story into kind of its basic form, let's look at it like this. You can probably add more, but for the sake of this exercise, we're only going to keep it to a few. I want to compare these other 2 versions and see how they approach 3 different things. Number 1, how do they handle this cast of characters? Number 2, how do they approach this story within their specific universe? And number 3, what does it do that you couldn't get out of the games? I think having this criteria will help us break down the positives for each adaptation. I want to see what makes each version stand out from the original. So for our second version, let's kind of save our eyes and look directly to the paper as we look at Archie's Sonic the Hedgehog issues 79 through 84 and Sonic Super Special number 13. To provide a little context going into this part of this massive comic, just a few issues prior was when Sonic shifted from more of a classic look to his adventure design. Obviously this was to coincide with the new era of Sonic, but one thing that was also a standout, Eggman was dead. Yeah, issue 50 of Archie Sonic saw Robotnik die. So what did they do? Well, they brought in an Eggman from another zone who was a mechanized version of Robotnik that could conveniently change his form into a modern Eggman design. Wow. Anyway, now back to the actual story. King Acorn discovers that Eggman has discovered the City of the Ancients, so they plan an expedition to check it out and ensure that Eggman isn't up to anything crazy. One problem though. Amy Rose can't go. That's because she's too young. Well, after one wish on the Ring of Acorns that the prince was going to use to heal their sick and comatose mom, Amy Rose now has her modern design. Yippee! So the Freedom Fighters make it to the ancient city of Station Square, which is inside the Sonic OVA mountain, and they get to take it all in. That was a really crazy sentence that I just said. Now, one thing that this medium has the advantage of is the way that it presents each character's specific story. What I mean by that is one artist focuses on Sonic's side of the story, while another can handle Knuckles or Gamma or Big. So in most of the issues, Sonic's story will wrap up and we'll instantly hop into Knuckles and his plot, with a different artist doing the work. Now, if you know anything about Archie and how it handles Knuckles during a good chunk of the series, you'd know that the echidnas are pretty important. And what plot in the games revolves around the echidnas? No! So, there is a large focus on the echidnas, and especially a large focus on Knuckles. This section of the story sees that he's been having dreams of Angel Island falling to the surface, and when he wakes up to see that it's actually happened, he goes to find answers from his people. During this section, we find out Eggman actually found perfect chaos within the cat country, freed it from a black emerald, then needed to use 7 shards of the Master Emerald to make Chaos whole. That gets into even more context about the emeralds, but just know there still has to be 7 strong energy rocks, okay? Okay. Echidna's affected, Chaos shards, neat. It's also worth mentioning that the current Echidna tension lies with the cat people where the rock that held Chaos was at. We're also introduced to Big and Gamma. Big puts the hurt on him, then Gamma instantly takes Froggy. Way to go, getting all of our players on the board, sending them all on their unique journeys like in the games themselves. The only difference in the plot is the aforementioned involvement of the cat people. Also similar, the Knuckles clan and Chief Pac-A-Mac wanted to use the emeralds to turn the tides and were met with the same fate as the original story. Well, getting to this point, I'd like to note that while reading these few issues, it is not very chronological. You're kind of having to place it together yourselves. That's not too bad, because if you play each campaign all the way through, you're pretty much doing the same thing. Just thought it's worth mentioning. All that is to say, everything comes all together when instead of being in the main series, we hop over into the larger Sonic Super Special number 13. With Amy missing, the Freedom Fighters go on the hunt for her, leading into Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles fighting Chaos 4, everyone making it onto the egg carrier, and the inevitable final Chaos fight and the crash. Well, when the end game of the story begins, Chaos becomes a tornado itself, absorbing the Super Emerald along with the other 6 other Super Emeralds to become perfect Chaos. Cue Cal sucking out the emeralds from Chaos, and of course, Super Sonic. The biggest difference for this part is that Super Sonic doesn't fully do the trick, as the Freedom Fighters and Knuckles help Sonic lure Chaos into the generator and short-circuit the creature. Knuckles has a Spider-Man moment in lifting this huge generator so it can all happen. Chaos returns to his 0th form, Cal and Chaos go to Sonic Heaven, and the story of Sonic Adventure proper wraps up. There's a little bit of an epilogue, which we never get from the games, obviously, but some other fun story bits are Knuckles returning to the Master Emerald and getting that back to normal, and we get to see Sonic fight that Silver Sonic 2 model from the final egg. That's neat. Now that we've gotten to the end of Archie's version, what do I think? Well, as a story, I really enjoy it. I mean, it's short. It takes about an hour to read through everything. Even though it was during a phase of Archie that was a little inconsistent. But how does it hold up with our criteria? Well, it features all 8 of the characters, obviously, with probably the biggest highlight being Knuckles. Knuckles gets a bit more of a spotlight for 2/3 of this story, and I think it's a good thing to have him see more of a focus. It is a story that sees a lot of his people, and I think that while Archie does have some odd bit of echidna lore, I think it was appropriate and overall really good to see Knuckles get time to speak to Cal and feel a bit more tension with everything involving Chaos. Obviously, Sonic is the main character, but in such an echidna-heavy story, it made sense that Knuckles maybe had a story that was at least on par or similar timing to Sonic, so I think the comics kind of helped that aspect. Speaking of Cal, unlike the game where everyone at least gets one vision into seeing back in time and get more of the past, Cal only visits Knuckles and then one time visits Sonic when Perfect Chaos is causing mass hysteria and property damage. So while we do get to see the backstory, there's less of feeling like everyone has something to give to the entire plot with Chaos. I mean, in a story like this in a monthly comic, it makes sense that not everyone gets that kind of time. Especially when you have characters like Gamma that literally don't interact with Chaos at all. Speaking of Gamma, he's just gone. Gamma just flies away at the end of Sonic Super Special 13, and then we never get to see Gamma resolve his plotline. You want to know when we see Gamma again in the comics? Sonic Universe issue 3, which came out alongside issue 199 of Sonic the Hedgehog. To fill you in, Gamma ends up becoming this universe's E123 Omega in a sense after being a lone wolf soldier for a long time. He destroys his brothers and then helps in the war against Eggman. While it is still a conceptually interesting plot of an inanimate object forming what is essentially a digital soul, we don't get this resolution for years. So if you take just this story at face value, you won't get resolution in comparison to Adventure's fantastic story that Gamma gets in the game. Amy, Tails, and Big, they're okay. I mean, Amy becoming her modern design is great, and kind of messed up when you think of how stupid she was, but she's a child, I guess I can let it pass. But there isn't much change to her story. Tails gets even less of a spotlight here, not really even focusing on his story of his independence. That's probably due to Tails getting tons of spotlight in the comics already, especially after the globetrotting adventure that him and Sonic just took and got back from earlier in the comic. It was literally just a few issues prior. Big gets just about as much attention as you'd expect. He really is just a chill guy. Well, for starters, Station Square is in a literal volcano. Humans are an interesting topic in the Archie universe, so them existing in a mountain is honestly the most normal thing that you can really get. Now, like I stated earlier, the Chaos Emeralds aren't really a thing at this point in the Archie story. Please don't ask me about it, I do not want to explain. So them using the Super Emeralds and kind of shoehorning them in during the final act is serviceable. It works. However, it is kind of nuts that Chaos's origin comes from a gem that is native to the Cat Country and doesn't have an origin from the Echidnas despite their connection to the Master Emerald. Maybe you could argue that it was a friends on the other side of the war type of story with Tikal and Chaos, but I couldn't imagine Chaos being friendly to the cats either. Like I said, the Echidnas have an insane amount of lore in this series, so I'm glad that they got the highlight here. Moving on. I think if you're really invested in the lore of this version of Sonic, I think you'll appreciate things more like the Echidna lore and how Chaos is involved in this universe, even if it was just for a little while. While some of the art is a little hit or miss, I believe during some of these issues, I do like the Super Sonic design and this lanky Sonic look. Stephen Butler's version of Sonic is one that I think is kind of underrated. Also, Big gets to show up more! Woo! There aren't a ton of things that are super dependent on Archie's past here, so this is just overall a good adaptation. Good job. This adaptation provides just enough to do a good job telling the story, but also enough new stuff to where it's not exact. I think it jives really well with this version of Sonic. But now we hop from the paper to the screen as we watch Sonic X episodes 27 through 32, our last adaptation of Sonic Adventure. Using the sub, of course, because I want to ensure that I see the version that it was intended to be. They decide to publicly execute these echidnas, you bet your bottom dollar that I'm gonna watch it. Don't need any more Gerald Robotnik firing squad sensors today, no sir! To provide a little more context for this version, Season 1 had moments that foreshadowed the Sonic Adventure plotline. All the way back in episode 17, Knuckles had a vision of the Master Emerald and began hearing from Tikal. Episode 22 shows the first Chow Garden. The finale brings in Chaos Control and has the Mystic Ruins. Oh! And Sonic X literally takes place in Station Square. Like, what? The beginning of this season instantly has us being introduced to Big and his water-possessed frog, along with Eggman creating the E100 series. This episode is right off the coattails of a large 6-month time skip, so as we're meeting these two new characters, we're also catching up with the rest of our cast. Is what I'd like to say in full confidence, but this 6 months since the Eggman attack isn't really taken seriously at all. Amy is living on her own, Tails creates a new workshop, Knuckles is back on his island, but Chris, who was so nervous about all of his friends leaving before, doesn't seem bothered that it's just him and Cream now. Maybe it was different if I was experiencing it when it was actually airing, but to me this is just a nitpick. Whatever. Speaking of Chris and Cream, Chris's mom brings him a Chaos Emerald. What? They meet Big, who is trying to hunt Froggy, then they end up meeting Eggman, who introduces Chaos to the world. Cue the Chaos Zero and Sonic fight, but we instantly see Knuckles join in, and they both fight Chaos too. Outside of the beginning being changed just a bit, the next few episodes almost do the same as the games. Tails and Sonic fight Chaos 4 in Windy Valley, Knuckles is hunting the Master Emerald Shards and getting visions from Tikal, and Amy's being kidnapped by Zero after meeting their bird friend, who is now named Lily instead of Birdie. Big and Chris are besties that are hunting for Froggy, and then Gamma grabs him. Okay, I have to bring something up now that we've gotten to this point. We're introduced to Gamma and all of his brethren, and guess what? Gamma is the only one with hands. How does Eggman expect for all these robots to efficiently capture this frog when he is making them have what is essentially a dingo from Black Ops 3 for hands? Gamma has a gun, sure, but he has another hand. Please excuse me. So it's now time for the epic egg carrier showdown, which is honestly pretty cool. Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles getting up there with the X-Tornado, Amy and Gamma's interaction, and then Chris and Big trying to get Froggy. Add on the Chaos 6 fight, and there comes down the egg carrier. When everyone's back on the ground, Sonic gets guided by Tikal to learn more about Chaos, and then Tails defuses the missile after Eggman is in a cranky mood, and then Gamma secures the dub and destroys his brothers. 07. Now that we made into the end game, Tikal teleports Knuckles and Sonic To show them the fate of the Echidna clan, Chaos gathers all the 7 Chaos Emeralds, then begins to rack up that blood insurance. In this episode, while I know some of the complaints of Sonic X involve the human characters, it's interesting to see how regular people respond to disasters like this. The main cast deduced that Sonic needs to take down Perfect Chaos, so he turns into Supersonic moment, then the final shot of Big fishing after the disaster. The end. While I talked about Archie a lot longer than Sonic X, it's because that Sonic X has 2 episodes that truly hit the same story beats of the original game, almost beat for beat. Again, it's not a bad thing at all, but if you put them on paper and compared the two, you would see very, very few differences. So let's just look at our criteria. You get to see Tails get his story, Knuckles is pretty on the mark, and Gamma gets his whole story as well, and it's done pretty great. The 2 characters that get a bit more love are, shockingly, Amy, Rose, and Big. Big is around Chris a lot more in this version, the 2 of them working together to find Froggy. Also, he just shows up to point Amy in the direction of the egg carrier and just has endless good energy. Amy's story, which is definitely the weakest out of all these, got just a bit more time with her and was less of a focus on chasing Sonic. Sure, we see her at the beginning with her desire to have Sonic pursue her, but one of Amy's best qualities is her compassion for others, and I think it's shown a bit better here than in the game. A little similar to Archie, Tycal only reveals herself to Knuckles and Sonic. Sonic does get a moment with Tycal by himself, so he is a little bit more involved this time around. This section is stuff that I've already stated, but Sonic X was practically built to adapt Sonic Adventure. Station Square is the main setting of the show, and all of the human characters, along with the Mystic Ruins, were brought here via Chaos Control last season and is seen as a tourist attraction. Doing a lot of the setup in Season 1 made the transition to the story a lot easier to happen, I think. There weren't very many new concepts to begin this story, so it seemed a bit more natural, especially when you consider that adding humans into Sonic Adventure was kind of jarring at the time of the game, but here in X, you're more used to it. Kind of similar to the last section where I may repeat some things, which is fine when I'm kind of summing it all up, but I do like the human focus. In the game, you see Perfect Chaos flooding the streets, destroying buildings, ruining lives, and probably killing a few people. You see 0 humans and how they respond to it. In this, you see people like the President's aide getting Sam Speed out of the water and people trying to desperately make it to the higher ground. I really like that aspect because, yeah, maybe that's edgy, but how can you have a massive disaster like this and not think about that part of it? X shows the part of this that you don't get to see in the games, and even if it's small, I kind of like that they do that. Outside of that, getting more of a focus on some of the other characters is fun, but it is just a pretty accurate adaptation from game to show. Sonic X's adaptation serves its purpose and is a really good translation from game to show. I honestly was excited to watch it because I couldn't remember a lot of the details. It's probably because the show made it so similar to the game that I just did not distinguish the two. However, it definitely exceeded my expectations and made it a really cool way to start out their second season. Sometimes a lot of people want one-to-one versions that feel like the game is hopping into the page or vice versa, but that's just not necessarily always the best approach. An adaptation should feel slightly newer and not just redo the old story, because then what's the point of ingesting something other than just the original? I should also state, because one of you will want to argue about it, that the Archie comics call their story a tie-in because it was used to promote the game. So again, it's good that it had other standout qualities that didn't take away from people going to purchase the actual game itself. Now, I'm not going to rank all these adaptations, mostly because the game's going to win. But does that make the other two bad? No. Not at all. I want to encourage fans to go and try out something a little bit different to try to see all the positives from something that's in a different format. It's something that's similar to you, but is also a little bit different. I think that's what makes adaptations a lot of fun. Now, let's just wait until I do this again with Archie's Sonic Adventure 2 adaptation. What do you mean Archie only did it for 1 issue?